But let's say somebody wants to read something difficult. What specifically might you suggest for them to read, and how do they know if they're actually understanding what they're reading?
That's a really good question. I think that you can kind of pick anything. I mean, I even think a dense novel would be something great, just something that you can't fly through. I think all of us, like to do easy reads, right? Where you're like, oh, I'm kind of like skimming the page, I'm getting the gist, I mean, I know it's almost Game of Thrones time. Some Game of Thrones might have come back out by the time this podcast is is on. But I think, even like something like Game of Thrones, like complicated names, or you're trying to follow complicated stories, like anything that kind of challenges you and stops you from speed reading, like you might do with a novel or a blog post. I think one of the things about our current environment with social media, with email, with all of our electronic communications is we oftentimes are either multitasking when we read or we are skimming. I mean, I skim all day long. Not anything important. Don't tell my team. But, I mean, we skim the news and things like that. So it can be hard to try and to focus on just sitting down to read, maybe on actual paper. You could go and like do something crazy, like buy a real book and maybe even take notes or mark up notes. I have 2 little kids, and I was so geeking out this week because I'm reading this parenting book on discipline, this is what life becomes when you start to have kids and like do other things. And so I was reading this book and I full on had my marker out and I was like taking notes in the margins like a law student, because I'm like, I need to retain this information. I was like, name it to tame it, so I can like remember. So I think it can be really anything. But you want to just get into this idea that you can sit in one place and do something focused. And then maybe you can even challenge yourself to tell a friend or your partner or even your dog, if you don't have anyone in your house, what you read about. Because I think that idea of taking in information and then processing it and then saying it back is very challenging sometimes. And sometimes I think we don't even appreciate that we're not retaining what we read. Another example of this is I've been listening. One of my kids is a baby, so I do a lot of like walking around with the baby because I live in San Francisco. And so I've been listening to audiobooks, which makes me feel like a 60-year-old lady walking around listening to my audiobook, but it's like the only way I get to like read right now. And I was listening to a book by this behavioral psychologist that I thought was just fascinating. And came home to explain to my husband what I had heard, but I am not an auditory learner. And so terminology and retention of new words and new phrases is very hard for me if I don't see it. So I could barely explain. I was like, I listened to this book. It was amazing. So there's a part of your brain like over here, I can't remember what it's called, and he was just laughing at me. But I realized, from a study perspective, if I was in law school, that would have been a great sign that I shouldn't just be listening to lectures, because I wouldn't be able to retain that information. So kind of just being aware of how you are interacting with stuff, I think can be really powerful in getting you ready for the law school experience.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.